"Dad, you're absolutely useless," my son Marcus said, throwing his napkin on the table when I announced I'd lost everything. The whole family sat there in stunned silence as I explained how bad investments had wiped out our $50 million empire. But while everyone stared at me like I'd become a stranger, Rosa quietly appeared beside my chair with a cup of chamomile tea and whispered, "Don't worry, Mr. William. Everything will be okay. If you've ever wondered who really loves you for you, not your money, if you've ever wanted to test the people closest to you when they think you have nothing left to offer, settle in, friend, because this old man just pulled off the greatest social experiment of his life, and the results will either restore your faith in humanity or break your heart completely. And if you're here for stories about finding out who your real family is when the chips are down, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I'm William, and this is Coffee with Grandpa, where we talk about the moments that reveal people's true character. This story taught me that sometimes the person who serves you is the only one who truly sees you. That dinner party became the most expensive test I ever ran, not because of the money I pretended to lose, but because of what I discovered about the people I'd spent my whole life supporting. Rosa's small act of kindness in that moment of rejection became the most valuable thing anyone had ever given me. Pure, unconditional compassion when everyone else saw me as worthless. The look of disgust on my own son's face when he thought I was broke told me everything I needed to know about 42 years of fatherhood. But Rosa's gentle whisper told me something even more important, that love isn't about what you can provide. It's about who you are when you have nothing left to give. I'd built Patterson Industries from nothing, starting with a small construction company and growing it into a real estate empire that stretched across 3 states. Every brick laid, every deal closed, every 16-hour workday had been motivated by wanting to provide for my family. But somewhere along the way, I'd become a bank account with a heartbeat instead of a father and grandfather. That night, watching my family calculate their disappointment while Rosa showed me the only genuine kindness in the room, I realized I'd been living among strangers who shared my last name. The test I'd planned as a simple experiment became a revelation that would change everything about how I viewed love, loyalty, and what really matters when everything else falls away. I'd been planning this test for months, ever since my wife Dorothy passed away 2 years ago. Her death made me realize how isolated I'd become, surrounded by people who loved my generosity, but seemed to have little interest in my actual company. Every conversation with family revolved around money, business opportunities, investment advice, expensive gifts they expected for birthdays and holidays. Marcus had grown up with every advantage money could buy: private schools, Ivy League education, a trust fund that kicked in when he turned 30. But instead of gratitude, I saw entitlement. Instead of building his own legacy, he'd become dependent on the Patterson name and the Patterson fortune. His wife Jessica was even worse, treating me like a personal ATM while barely acknowledging my existence otherwise. Dorothy used to be my buffer, the one who reminded me that family was about more than financial obligations. She'd see through people's motivations, gently warning me when someone was taking advantage of my generosity. "William," she'd say, "you can't buy love, but you can certainly rent it for a while." After she died, I lost my translator for human nature, and the rental agreements became more obvious. Rosa had been with our family for 15 years, starting as a housekeeper when Amanda was just a baby. Over the years, she'd become more than an employee. She was the one who remembered my coffee preferences, who asked about my doctor appointments, who actually listened when I told stories about building the business. While my own family rushed through conversations, Rosa would sit and hear about my day like it mattered. The idea for the test came during last year's Christmas dinner. I'd given everyone expensive gifts. Marcus got a new BMW. Jessica received diamond earrings. Even distant relatives got generous checks. But the only person who gave me something personal was Rosa, a hand-knitted scarf in my favorite color, made during her evenings off. Everyone else's gifts felt obligatory, purchased with my own money through allowances and business distributions. I spent months planning the fake bankruptcy, working with my attorney and accountant to create believable documentation. The goal wasn't to trick people permanently, but to see who would stick around when William Patterson, the millionaire, became William Patterson, the broke old man. I needed to know if anyone loved me enough to stay when the money was gone. The hardest part was watching Rosa worry about her job security as I prepared for the announcement. She'd worked so hard to provide for her own family, sending money back to Mexico for her grandchildren's education. The guilt of potentially causing her stress ate at me, but I had to know the truth about everyone in my life, including her. The first signs of my family's conditional love appeared during the weeks leading up to my announcement. I started dropping hints about financial trouble, mentioning some challenging investments and market volatility that was affecting my portfolio. The reactions were telling. Instead of offering emotional support, everyone immediately started asking about how this might affect their own financial situation. Marcus's first response to my hints about money troubles wasn't concern for my well-being, but anxiety about the business distributions he'd been receiving monthly. "Dad, you're not thinking of cutting back on the family allowances, are you?" he asked during one of our rare phone conversations. Not "are you okay?" or "what can I do to help?" Just worry about his own income stream. Jessica became noticeably cooler during family gatherings, spending less time in conversation and more time on her phone. When I mentioned having to be more careful with spending, she actually rolled her eyes and muttered something about finally having to budget like normal people. The woman who'd never worked a day in her life was annoyed that her free ride might be ending. Even my extended family started treating me differently. My brother Robert, who'd been calling weekly for years, suddenly became too busy for our conversations. Cousins who'd been regular visitors to my home found reasons to decline dinner invitations. It was like they could smell financial instability and wanted to distance themselves before it became contagious. The most painful rejection came from Amanda, my 16-year-old granddaughter, who I'd hoped might be different from the rest. When I suggested we skip our usual expensive birthday celebration and do something simple instead, she looked genuinely offended. "Grandpa, you're not going to be one of those cheap old people, are you?" she asked with the casual cruelty that only teenagers can deliver. Rosa was the only person who responded to my hints about financial trouble with genuine concern. "Mr. William, are you eating enough?" she asked one afternoon, noticing I'd been picking at my lunch. "If money is tight, I can cook more simple meals. We don't need fancy ingredients to make good food." She was offering to help me save money while everyone else was calculating how my problems might affect them. The contrast became stark during those weeks of preparation. My blood relatives were performing damage control on their own financial expectation, while the woman I paid to clean my house was genuinely worried about my health and happiness. Rosa asked about my stress levels, suggested I get more rest, even brought me herbal tea to help with anxiety she thought I was experiencing about money. By the time I was ready to make my announcement, I already knew what the test would reveal. But I needed to see it play out completely, needed to watch my family's true nature emerge when they thought their golden goose had been cooked. The dinner party became less about discovery and more about confirmation of what my heart already suspected. The dinner party was set for a Saturday evening in early October. with the whole family gathered for what they thought was a celebration of my birthday. I'd spared no expense on the meal, ironic, considering what I was about to announce, wanting one last hurrah before revealing my supposed financial ruin. Rosa had prepared my favorite dishes, and the dining room looked elegant with fresh flowers and the good china. Marcus arrived with Jessica and Amanda, all dressed nicely and in good spirit. My brother Robert came with his wife, along with a few cousins who'd become regular fixtures at family gatherings over the years. Everyone seemed relaxed and happy, probably expecting the usual generous birthday checks and announcements about business profits they'd all share in. The mood was festive until I cleared my throat to speak. I've gathered you all here tonight because I have some important news to share. I began watching faces around the table grow attentive. Over the past few months, I've made some investment decisions that haven't worked out as planned. The truth is, I've lost almost everything. Patterson Industries is facing bankruptcy, and I'm personally broke. The silence that followed could have been cut with a knife. Marcus was the first to react, his face cycling through shock, disbelief, and then anger faster than I'd ever seen emotions change on someone. "What do you mean broke?" he demanded, his voice rising. "How is that even possible? You had accountants, advisors, safeguards." His immediate focus wasn't on my well-being, but on understanding how this disaster could have happened to his inheritance. Jessica's reaction was even more telling. She actually laughed, a short, bitter sound that filled the awkward silence. "Well, this explains why you've been acting so strange lately," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "I should have known something was wrong when you started talking about being more careful with money. Normal people don't just lose $50 million overnight." The rest of the family sat in stunned silence, processing what this meant for their own financial security. Robert was the first to speak up, asking detailed questions about assets, bankruptcy proceedings, and whether there was any way to recover the losses. Nobody asked how I was feeling, whether I needed emotional support, or what they could do to help me through this crisis. That's when Marcus delivered the words that cut deepest. "Dad, you're absolutely useless. Do you understand what you've done? You've destroyed everything our family built. 3 generations of work gone because you couldn't stick to safe investments. You're supposed to be the smart businessman, but you've proven you're just a foolish old man who got lucky for a few decades." The cruelty in his voice, the complete lack of compassion for his own father's supposed downfall, hit me like a physical blow. This was my son, the boy I'd raised, educated, and supported for over 4 decades, calling me useless because I could no longer provide for him financially. Jessica nodded in agreement, and I could see others around the table thinking similar thoughts even if they didn't voice them. But then Rosa appeared beside my chair, quietly setting down a cup of chamomile tea, my favorite for when I was stressed. Her voice was barely a whisper, meant only for my ears. "Don't worry, Mr. William, everything will be okay. You're still the same good man you were yesterday." In that moment of universal rejection, one person saw my worth as separate from my wealth. The weeks following my announcement were like living in a social science experiment about human nature. One by one, family members found reasons to avoid me. Phone calls became shorter and less frequent, and invitations to family events mysteriously stopped arriving. The man who'd been the center of every family gathering for decades suddenly became a burden they were all too busy to bear. Marcus stopped by the house exactly once after the dinner, and only to ask about liquidating assets that might affect his own financial planning. He spent 20 minutes discussing business matters and didn't ask once how I was coping emotionally with losing everything I'd worked for. When he left, he said, "Let me know when you figure out how to fix this mess, Dad. Until then, I need to focus on protecting my own family's future. Jessica's transformation was even more dramatic. The woman who'd called me Daddy William for 18 years suddenly couldn't find time for phone calls. When she did answer, conversations were brief and awkward, filled with transparent excuses about being busy. The expensive dinners and shopping trips we'd shared became memories, as she discovered. She had no interest in spending time with a broke father-in-law. My brother Robert managed one lunch meeting where he spent the entire time giving unsolicited advice about starting over at your age and suggesting I look into senior housing options since maintaining my current lifestyle would be impossible. He picked up the check with obvious reluctance, making a show of counting bills like he was doing me an enormous favor by buying lunch for his broke brother. Even Amanda, my granddaughter, who I'd hoped might see beyond money, started making excuses to skip our weekly visits. "I'm really busy with school and friends, Grandpa," she'd say when I called. But I could hear the discomfort in her voice. The girl who used to light up when I arrived was now embarrassed by her financially ruined grandfather. Rosa, meanwhile, became my lifeline to dignity. She continued her work with the same professionalism and kindness she'd always shown, but now she added small gestures that meant everything. Extra care in preparing my meals, gentle check-ins about my mood, even bringing me library books she thought I might enjoy. She never once asked about her job security or whether I could still afford to employ her. One afternoon, about 6 weeks into my poverty, Rosa found me sitting alone in my study, staring out the window. "Mr. William," she said softly, "my grandmother used to say that a man's worth isn't in his bank account. It's in how he treats people when he has power and how he handles himself when that power is gone. You're still the same kind man who remembered my daughter's graduation, who helped pay for my mother's surgery, who always says good morning like he means it." Her words brought tears to my eyes because they reminded me of what I'd almost forgotten during this experiment. I was still the same person I'd been before the fake bankruptcy. My values, my character, my capacity for love and kindness hadn't changed. The only thing that had changed was other people's perception of my usefulness to them, and that said everything about them and nothing about me. After 3 months of living as broke William, I'd seen enough to know exactly who deserved what in my will. Rosa had proven herself to be the only person who valued me as a human being rather than a financial resource. Every day brought new evidence of her genuine care. She'd stay late when she thought I seemed lonely, bring homemade soup when I appeared tired, and listen to my stories like they mattered even when I had nothing to offer her in return. The decision to leave everything to Rosa wasn't made in anger or spite, though I certainly felt both toward my blood family. It was made in recognition of something pure and rare, unconditional love from someone who had no obligation to provide it. Rosa had shown me more genuine care during 3 months of fake poverty than my own family had shown me in years of real wealth. I scheduled a family meeting for Thanksgiving weekend, telling everyone I had important news about the financial situation. They probably expected me to announce that I'd found some hidden assets or that the bankruptcy wasn't as bad as originally thought. Marcus actually sounded optimistic on the phone for the first time in months, probably calculating his restored inheritance in his head. The gathering was smaller this time, only immediate family, since the extended relatives had made themselves scarce during my supposed hard times. Marcus, Jessica, and Amanda sat around the same dining room table where I'd announced my fake ruin 3 months earlier. The difference in their energy was notable. They seemed anxious and hopeful, like people waiting for good news they felt entitled to receive. "I have a confession to make," I began, watching their faces carefully. "Everything I told you 3 months ago was a lie. I never lost any money. Patterson Industries is thriving, my investments are solid, and I'm worth exactly what I was worth before that dinner. The bankruptcy, the financial ruin, all of it was fake. I wanted to see who really cared about me when they thought I had nothing left to give. The shock on their faces was immediate and complete. Marcus's mouth actually fell open, while Jessica looked like she'd been slapped. Amanda stared at me with confusion, trying to process the idea that her grandfather had deliberately deceived them all. The silence stretched uncomfortably as they realized what this revelation meant about their own behavior during my supposed crisis. "I know what you're thinking," I continued. "You're wondering why I would do such a thing, what I hope to accomplish with this deception. The answer is simple. I needed to know who loved William Patterson the man, not William Patterson the bank account." The results were ... illuminating. Marcus started to speak, probably to offer excuses or explanation, but I held up my hand to stop him. "During the past 3 months, exactly one person in this house treated me with kindness, respect, and genuine concern for my well-being. Rosa never asked about her job security, never complained about potentially reduced wages, never made me feel like a burden or a disappointment. She brought me tea when I was sad, cooked my favorite meals when I seemed stressed, and reminded me daily that my worth wasn't tied to my wealth." The implications of my words were starting to sink in, and I could see panic beginning to replace shock on their faces. "I've made a decision about my estate," I announced, pulling out the legal documents I'd had prepared. "I'm leaving everything, the house, the business, all investments and assets, to Rosa Martinez. She's shown me what real family looks like, and I want to make sure she's taken care of for the rest of her life." The explosion that followed my announcement was everything I'd expected and more. Marcus jumped up from his chair, shouting about how I couldn't leave family money to the help, while Jessica demanded to know if I'd lost my mind along with my moral compass. Amanda just sat there crying, probably realizing that her college fund and future inheritance had just evaporated because of her own shallow behavior during my test. "You can't be serious," Marcus yelled, his face red with rage and disbelief. "She's not family. She's an employee. You're going to destroy everything we've built together because of some twisted social experiment?" His reaction proved everything I'd suspected about his motivations. In his mind, Rosa wasn't worthy of my money because she hadn't been born into the family, conveniently ignoring that family members are supposed to love each other regardless of financial circumstances. I let them vent their fury and disbelief for several minutes before responding calmly. "Rosa has been more of a family to me than any of you have been in years. She's the one who remembered my birthday without being reminded, who asked about my health appointments, who listened to my stories without checking her phone. She saw me as a person worth caring about, even when she thought I was broke and useless." The contrast couldn't have been clearer. While my blood relatives screamed about their lost inheritance, Rosa stood quietly in the doorway where she'd heard everything, tears streaming down her face. Not tears of joy about the money, though I'm sure that was part of it, but tears of recognition that someone valued her kindness enough to reward it beyond her wildest dream. "Mr. William," she said softly, "I never expected anything like this. I just treated you the way my mother taught me to treat all people, with respect and kindness. You don't need to give me your money to prove a point to your family, but that's exactly why she deserved it." Rosa's first instinct was to make sure I wasn't making a decision I'd regret, even when that decision would make her wealthy beyond imagination. "This isn't about proving a point," I told her, standing up to face my family one last time. "This is about recognizing true worth. Rosa has shown me more love and loyalty than any of you have shown me in years. You loved my wallet. She loved me. The difference is worth $50 million. Marcus stormed out, followed by Jessica and a sobbing Amanda. They haven't spoken to me since. 6 months later, I'm living in a smaller house that Rosa and I chose together, while she's learning to manage her new wealth with the same grace she brought to managing my household. She's bought a house for her daughter's family, set up college funds for her grandchildren, and still brings me tea every afternoon because that's who she is, someone who serves others out of love, not obligation. My former family occasionally reaches out through lawyers, trying to contest the will or negotiate some settlement, but my decision is final. The people who called me useless when they thought I was broke don't get to claim family loyalty now that they know I'm rich. Sometimes the most valuable thing you can discover is who really loves you when you have nothing left to give. Tell me, friend, have you ever wondered who would stick around if you lost everything tomorrow? Have you ever been surprised by kindness from unexpected places while people you trusted showed their true colors? Share your story in the comments below. I read every one and learned something new about human nature from each of you. And if this story reminded you that real family isn't always the one you're born into, that love isn't something you can buy, but it's definitely something you can recognize, go ahead and subscribe to Coffee with Grandpa. I've got more stories about discovering what really matters, about finding family in unexpected places, and about the beautiful surprises that come when you stop measuring relationships by what people can do for you. Sometimes the person serving you is actually the one saving you.